On Sundays, we formed into a long line. We called it a crocodile. 2 by 2 by 2, a stream of about 40 lads, dressed alike with Eton collars and Eton jackets that came down to the waist and striped pants. Then we tramped about 2 miles to what was called a chapel. In the summer, making this trip, we wore straw hats. In the winter, top hats. Each of us was responsible for keeping his clothes clean, down to our knees anyway. Below, we were caked with mud. Our unhappy crocodile line would wind itself along this grim Putney road to church. You wanted to be out in the open air. You could see the other kids playing, and yet you had to march solemnly, like English soldiers, along this ragged footpath, with old Wither Arm Sir Worthbottom up ahead, stamping his stick solemnly and moving with what he thought was a proper bearing, none of us daring to break step. Sunday had one compensation. On that day, we got something to eat. It was plum duff, which we called spotted dog. When we returned from chapel, after listening to the nonsense that was preached there, we had to take off our special Sunday clothes. It was always a race, because then you hurried down to the long board tables on the ground floor where, if you arrived swiftly, you figured you might get a bigger slice of spotted dog. This was an elongated hot pudding 3 feet long and made of something into a dough. And it was impregnated with parsley and raisins or dried plums. This was the big deal. The rest of the week, the food didn't come up to the standard of spotted dog. There were times when I thought Father's platypuses didn't do badly at all on board ship. By the time this long, wheat-laden bologna was put before us, our mouths were well salivated with anticipation. The message from God hadn't reached us. Spotted Dog had. I watched greedily as the headmaster sliced up the long dogs, and if I had a big enough slice, I was ready afterwards for a game of cricket out behind the school. At night, from time to time, Dufresne and I managed to smuggle in some Dutch cheese. This went on for 2 years, knowing that better food was out there in the outside world, and we dreamed of getting at it someday. The fact is, after I was dropped into this school, I was pretty much neglected by my parents. Father was going great guns in the world of science, coming up with some new little monster out of the primordial past every now and then. Mother and my favorite aunt, Betty, 2 young beauties, not much interested in Tasmanian devils, were having fun in Paris. I felt my loneliness in particular during vacation periods. When the time off season arrived, the fellows became excited. One was going to Devonshire, where his father had a launch. 2 Spanish boys, twins, were returning to Madrid, where they'd see a bullfight. Dufresne, whose family lived in the south of France, thought perhaps I might be able to go with him to his home. But nothing came of it, and he too left. Everybody left. I was alone in school, with the Burbridges, and the dubious features of the backyard of the college and the empty dormitories. Where were my parents? I wished very much I was with them. I was bewildered. I tried to make the best of it. I knew the way between Hammersmith and Putney Common, and I went into London from time to time. I had, as an allowance, about half a crown, and I couldn't do much with that. I foot-slogged from the school into London and about the great city. Occasionally, I took a bus. It only cost a penny. But there wasn't much of a jingle in my pockets. It taught me a great respect for money, probably the only lesson I learned at this school. Maybe not a bad one. While Father was in Australia, I don't suppose it crossed his mind that I was left alone at school. Maybe he thought Mother came to see me or took me out from time to time. I learned how to be alone. This was preparation for me. I suppose, for long stretches of being alone a little later in the jungles of New Guinea. These were formative years, and I learned to stand on my own two legs. But it was from this that my first resentment grew. Not even before, not the runnings away, not the 3 days in the closet, nor the spankings, but this being alone during the vacation seasons. I stress now that I have no such feelings left. You write it all off to the past and to childhood. My father was busy, up to his neck in work, and what it amounted to only was that somehow all of this made me hard inside. In my 15th year, I was expelled from Southwest London College. I had no interest in study. I played hooky. I was belligerent, restive, lost, angry. But because my father was Professor Flynn, I could get into another London school. This was Collett Court. It couldn't last. I was kicked out. For weeks I was in London, not registered in school. Once more, a professional move by my father determined my own course. We returned to Australia. I couldn't know that I was coming closer and closer to a break with such sporadic family ties as I did have. I was admitted to the North Shore Sydney Grammar School only because, again, I was Professor Flynn's son. Not that I could manage the tests and examinations and grades. In an arithmetic class, I simply didn't know what was going on. I was in revolt against all formal schooling. My travels from Tasmania to Australia to England and back to Australia had been upsetting to a scholastic career. Outside of reading and athletics, I was good for nothing. I had no interest in the dryly presented information of textbooks. It seemed useless to try to catch up with the others. In some ways, I was far ahead of all the boys about me. They may have known the interior of these books, but I already knew much of the world. I was bigger than most. I was an athlete, quite good at tennis, swimming, boxing, and ready to fight if picked on. I had won the Junior Davis Cup, and they wanted to train me for the Davis Cup. I had won diving championships. My accomplishments were strictly physical. My father was supremely patient with me, though I gave him nothing but trouble. School people couldn't understand the lapse in my learning. They said, "This is Professor Flynn's son. What's wrong?" He could get me into a school, any school, but nobody could make me study. I had an insatiable desire to run through the world and not to be hemmed in by anybody. I hated institutions like schools, with walls and fences. The world outside of school was more appealing. I acquired a fiancée. Her name was Naomi Dibbs, and she came from a very correct, serious family, a family that had much to do with the development of Australian culture and politics. She represented the social group that I either aspired to or felt I belonged to. She had to be courted in a reserved way. She was pretty, slender, blonde, blue-eyed, my physical type, and she was as naive about sex as I. I borrowed some money and bought a small diamond engagement ring and gave it to her. Her family was not entranced with that idea, but Naomi wore the ring, while my uncertain life at school became more uncertain. About this time, Father made an extraordinary discovery, locating a prehistoric fossilized whale deep in the cliffs of a lonely stretch of land in southern Tasmania. It was a find of great interest within the scientific community, and the sensation that accompanied it was stimulating to me. In school, I was proud as could be. When the whale residue was brought to Sydney, all the lads went to see it, and naturally, some of this scholarship brushed off on me. The find revealed the stage of evolution at which the whale had gone back to the sea as a mammal. It had fossilized bones in its fins that looked like hands and feet, and enormous jaws modeled like those of an alligator. It was many millions of years old. I preened. Father returned to England with his rare find, and the whale is now in the British Museum. The prestige rapidly washed off me. I was left alone again in Sydney. I set records for absolute school indifference. I wasn't in this school long before I had talks with Mr. Robson, the tall, red-headed schoolmaster, whose eyes looked so big behind his glasses. He warned me I was paying no attention to my studies, that I was headed for trouble. He knew my poor record elsewhere, and he cautioned me, for the sake of my father, to attend school properly. I only wondered how I could advance my affair with Elise, the attractive maid, aged about 30, who worked around the academy at night. There was a window at the rear of the dormitory, and I frequently leaped from it, a considerable drop of about 15 feet, and met Elise behind a hedge where there was seclusion. There was nothing sexual between Elise and me. Elise must have thought I was very curious. Maybe not. She used to do a bit of grubbing, but I didn't know how to open my fly with a lady present. Even so, it was much more interesting than algebra. We might hang out around the school by the hedge, or take off for the beaches. We took a ferry boat ride several times. I was having a vicarious kind of non-fruitful affair. It was fun skipping out, fooling the headmaster, taking off at night after a romantic leap to the ground. They knew I was getting out, but each morning I was back in school on time. The schoolheads didn't know what to do with me. Expel Professor Flynn's son? It wasn't pleasant to do.